Hello, I'm Larry Wilson. This is webinar number 8, discussing my book, Jesus' Final Victory. Today's presentation is the second half of my presentation on Prophecy 6. Now, Prophecy 6 is huge in terms of content, and I cannot begin to cover everything that I would like to say in even one or two presentations. So I hope that you will continue to study, that you will continue to examine this material, and if you have not read my book, Studies on the Seven Seals and the 144,000, I hope you will do so. A lot of information is found in that book that is not included in my book, Jesus' Final Victory. Now, you know that all of my printed materials are freely available on the web at www.wake-up.org. You can freely download all of my written materials there. Now, Prophecy 6 contains a really neat story. The story centers around a history book that was written by the Father before any history took place. Long before angels and human beings were created, the Father wrote a complete history of life, and then, to keep anyone from seeing what he had written, he sealed up the book with 7 seals. Perfectly sealed up. As you might expect, the Father wrote this book for a number of important reasons. We briefly looked into this matter in the previous webinar, and to make sure that we use our time wisely, I assume that you have already read Prophecy 6 in my book, Jesus' Final Victory, and I hope that after you watch today's presentation, you will reread it again. The more you know about apocalyptic prophecy, the more you will benefit from it. Okay, for today's study, let's go to the computer. We're going to look at 4 topics. We're going to attempt to, if we have enough time. We're going to look at God's sudden death law, the 4 horsemen of Revelation 6. Who are they? What happens when each seal is broken open? And ultimately, what happens when the contents of the book, sealed up with 7 seals, what happens when the contents are exposed? To begin with, I want to say there is a close relationship between the contents of the book and the breaking of the 7 seals. The breaking of each seal actually does 2 things. First, there is a new revelation about Jesus Christ that occurs in heaven and on earth as each seal is broken open. Now, I hope he doesn't mind this illustration, but I hope it will make the point. Jesus is like an infinite Vidalia onion. Now, as onions go, the Vidalia onions from South Georgia are the best on earth. Jesus is like an infinite onion. As each layer is peeled off, a delightful new layer appears containing tasty new information about him. So each time we learn something about Jesus from one seal, the next seal is like peeling off the older layer, the outer layer, and a delightful new layer appears containing tasty information about him. You see, the angels are still discovering new things about Jesus. He's an infinite being. And each time a seal is broken open on the book, sealed with 7 seals, human beings on earth discover new things about Jesus. Now you know why the last book in the Bible is called the Revelation of Jesus Christ. The revealing of all that Jesus is. Now, there is a second relationship between the 7 seals and the book that is sealed up. As each seal is broken, we move closer chronologically and intellectually to understanding God's process for resolving the sin problem. Resolving the sin problem. You may think that resolving the sin problem is as simple as burning up the wicked. But this is not the case, not even close. If the immediate execution of Lucifer and his angelic followers had been an excellent solution for the sin problem, God would have killed them instantly. Think about it. Millions of Christians are unaware of the process involved with the resolution of sin. Too many Christians are narrowly concerned with the salvation of self. And once they have been led to believe that self is safe from eternal loss, their interest in understanding the riches of God's grace, the wisdom of His laws, and His plan to resolve the sin problem comes to an end. This is very sad and very shallow, I might add. So I hope you will give today's presentation some serious thought, because the first prophecy in the book of Revelation has everything to do with God resolving the sin problem. Okay, I want to talk now for the next few minutes about God's sudden death law. Sudden death law. Before the angels were created, God had a sudden death law for anyone that sins. Basically, this law exists because it is God's way of protecting the universe from sin. Now, there's a really neat story behind this law, so please be patient as I attempt to lay out the details. Long before Jesus created earth, a crisis occurred in heaven, and it all started when Lucifer, the highest created being in the universe, became unhappy with the Father, because Lucifer wanted more honor and more authority than the Father permitted him to have. When Lucifer realized that he could not have the honor and worship that was given to Michael, the archangel, and Michael the archangel, you know, is Jesus before he came to earth as a man, Lucifer became Antichrist. Motivated by his jealousy of Christ and sustained by endless bitterness, Lucifer began a secret campaign of sedition against God and His government. Using nothing more than freedom of speech, the devil led 1/3 of the angels, holy, sinless angels, into defiant rebellion against the Father. Think about this. Speech affects choice. So what responsibility rests upon those of us who speak? Jesus said in Matthew 12:36, "But I tell you that men will have to give an account on the day of judgment for every careless word they have spoken. For by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned." I want you to consider this. Prior to His life on earth, Jesus lived among the angels. Yes, He lived among the angels as one of them. And He was called Michael, the archangel. Jesus looked like the angels, and He talked like the angels, and as far as they knew, He was an angel. They really didn't know in the beginning that He was God. Later, when Jesus came to earth, He became a man. That is, Jesus looked like a man, He talked like a man, and He lived as a man, and most people thought Jesus was a mere man. However, Jesus is not an angel or a man. Jesus is a God. He is one of the three, a co-eternal, separate, distinct member of the Godhead. In substance, Jesus is a God just like the Father and the Holy Spirit are gods. The Bible clearly teaches that Jesus is the creator of everything that exists, yet he has lived in the form of an angel, and he has lived in the form of a man. Why? Our Creator is willing to live in and among his creation for two reasons. First, Jesus lives as one of us so that he might experience life and see God as we see God, that he might experience life, that he might see and understand from our perspective what God looks like to us. That's the first reason he lives as one of us. Second, he lives among his creation so that he can reveal and demonstrate the infinite ways and wonderful character of the Father to all creation. Remember, Jesus said to his disciples, "If you have seen me, you have seen the Father." So we have Jesus, same God, in two different forms. He, to the angels, is Michael, the archangel, and to us, he's Jesus, the Son of God, or the Son of Man. Now, Lucifer developed a serious problem with Michael, the archangel, Jesus, the Son of God. Lucifer wanted to be exalted and worshiped like Jesus. As I said earlier, Lucifer and the angels did not know in the beginning that Michael was a god in the form of an angel. You see, Lucifer looked at Jesus as another angel. Actually, he looked upon him as a little lower than himself. We know the Scripture says that Jesus Christ does not change. He is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. The Bible tells us in Isaiah 53 that when Jesus came to earth, he lived as a common man. Isaiah 53 points out that there was no comeliness in Jesus. This means that he was not pretty, he was not attractive, physically speaking. There was nothing about his bearing or about his person, about his stature or position in life that made him anything special. In fact, he had very, very poor parents, and he worked as a carpenter. Jesus came and lived among us, actually even lower than many human beings live. Now, because Jesus is always the same, I assume that Jesus, when he created Lucifer, made him much more beautiful than himself. I believe that Lucifer was given every talent, every ability that Jesus could put into a created being. And because of Lucifer's great beauty, and because of Lucifer's great talent, and because of Lucifer's great voice for singing, and because of Lucifer's prowess as a respected and beloved leader, Lucifer came to look upon Jesus, or Michael, actually as an angel a little lower than himself, because I think Jesus had a very humble appearance. He wasn't nearly as pretty, wasn't nearly as beautiful, didn't show near as much talent as Lucifer. Jesus made Lucifer much more greater than himself. And you know, this expresses in profound terms the humility of the Godhead. Can you see Jesus bending over Peter's feet and washing his feet? Can you see Jesus hanging on the cross, practically naked, because of love for us, willing to die in our place? Look at the humility of Jesus on earth, and we might sense the same humility in heaven. And so I believe that Lucifer looked upon Jesus as another angel, actually a little lower than himself. Let's go back to the computer screen. Lucifer reasoned that he was the other covering cherub, and that he should be revered and worshiped, as was Michael, the other covering cherub. There were only two. Lucifer cloaked his envy and bitterness with self-righteousness. He justified his envy and his bitterness. And he began to create doubts about God's integrity by twisting topics and issues that God had not yet clarified. Lucifer discovered that holy and sinless angels could be alienated from God if he put the words and actions of the Father and Michael in a suspicious light. For example, everyone in heaven knew that the Father had foreknowledge. Lucifer argued that since the Father already knew what each angel would think and do, the Father could not be outwitted or overthrown. Lucifer argued the Father was a dictator, and it was his way or the highway. Actually, death. Because if you disagree with a dictator, your lifespan is drastically reduced. Lucifer claimed there could be no freedom in heaven because the Father was an all-knowing dictator. Because he was a dictator, the Father would prevent any angel from improving and gaining a higher place in God's government. And Lucifer insinuated this was grossly unfair. In fact, he used his own situation as proof. Why should he, one of the covering cherub, be treated as a lesser angel throughout eternity? Comparing himself, to Michael, the other covering cherub. Why should one covering cherub be more highly honored and worshiped? Lucifer preyed as a predator on the other angels' naive sympathy, and some of the angels empathized with Lucifer's unfair situation. Lucifer also told sympathetic angels that the Father did not give created beings the power of choice, because any choice that was contrary to God's way would be considered rebellion. Lucifer asserted that the angels were just eternal slaves and the Father was nothing more than an omnipotent control freak. So to ensure that the angels took his arguments seriously, Lucifer taunted the angels with a law that no one understood at the time. When the angels were created, Jesus told them about the Father's sudden death law. The law is very simple. It says this: you will be put to death on the day that you sin. Throughout the centuries, theologians have been puzzled by this law, and they have attempted to explain it in all kinds of ways that make no sense. They have manipulated and mauled and twisted this law in so many ways because there's a fatal misunderstanding. There is no need for a fancy explanation. The law means exactly what it says. Jesus declared this law to Adam and Eve on the day of their creation, on the sixth day. What did he say? Genesis 2:17. But you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat of it, you will surely die. In the King James Version, it's a little more emphatic. It says, for in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt be put to death. Thou shalt surely die. The sudden death law is the same law that was given to Adam and Eve and the angels. God has had this law from the beginning of time. Why does he have this law? Because the penalty for sin is death by execution. I rarely say anything profound, so I'll say it 3 times. The penalty for sin is death by execution. Finally, the penalty for sin is death by execution. You see, the consequence of sin is not the penalty for sin. The consequence of sin is death but by things like cancer, heart disease, and illness of all kinds. That's the consequence of sin. That's the kind of death we see today. No one has yet seen the penalty for sin except Jesus, who died on the cross. And there Jesus was executed, because the penalty for sin is death by execution. No lamb, no sacrificial lamb ever died on the altar from old age, because the penalty for sin is death by execution. Jesus was executed on the cross because the penalty for sin is death by execution. And get this, the wicked will be executed at the end of the 1,000 years because the penalty for sin is death by execution. All right, I hope I've made the point. Using arguments that were skillfully and logically framed to put God and His government in the poorest possible light, Lucifer convinced 1/3 of the angels that the Father could not possibly be a God of love because the sudden death law was inescapable. In other words, Lucifer argued that if someone should happen to exercise his power of choice in a way that God did not like, the result would be sudden death. Sudden death. Lucifer's argument against this law was sophisticated and convincing, and 1/3 of the holy angels, intelligent beings, lost their love and respect for the Father and Jesus. Lucifer framed his accusations in such a way that the Father appeared to be a tyrant. Lucifer positioned God's sudden death law in such a way that sinless angels became angry with God. Lucifer argued that God's sudden death law and God's foreknowledge were inseparable and inescapable. What does this mean? Therefore, Lucifer reasoned that God the Father is a tyrant, a real tyrant, and a huge number of angels reasoned likewise. Lucifer induced animosity and prejudice toward the Father, and he taunted the angels who chose to remain loyal to the Father and Michael. Using devious subterfuge, Lucifer summed up the options of the angels. Now listen carefully. Here are your options, angels, he said. Obey God and be His eternal slave. Or exercise your power of choice and immediately die as the sudden death law demands. Take your pick. Wow. There are the options, using Lucifer's carefully thought out argument to put God in the poorest light. Obey Him and be His eternal slave, or exercise your power of choice and immediately die. Take your pick. Lucifer argued, God already knows what each angel is going to do, and He has a law that justifies the death of any angel should he step out of line. So go ahead. Let's see you exercise your power of choice, and let's see where it gets you. Oh, Lucifer had the angels in a tailspin. Since there is no way around God's foreknowledge and His sudden death law, Lucifer told the angels they should form a union and fight for change. Working conditions in heaven needed improvement with better pay and benefits, and 1/3 of heaven united with Lucifer. By joining together with him, they agreed they would not remain the eternal slaves of a tyrant who claimed to be a God of love. Now remember, rebellion did not exist in the universe before Lucifer began campaigning against the Father. And don't forget, no one had observed a single instance where the sudden death law had been applied. This gave Lucifer a distinct advantage at that time, and he took gross advantage of it. When Lucifer began his assault on God and his government, the angels did not have the knowledge of good and evil. They had not seen evil. Heaven was filled with happy, holy, sinless angels. Therefore, at first, they did not comprehend or anticipate the depths or the outcome of Lucifer's lies. Eventually, the Father addressed Lucifer's complaints, but the Father's words had little effect because truth is inflammatory once rebellion has filled the heart. Let me say that again. Truth is always inflammatory once rebellion has filled the heart. You see, Jesus proved when he was on earth many times by speaking the truth. Truth only becomes inflammatory once rebellion has filled the heart. Eventually, Lucifer's envy of Christ morphed into open defiance. And strange as this may sound, the Father did not prevent Lucifer from saying whatever he wanted to say, because God upholds free speech. God allowed Lucifer to spread sedition throughout heaven, because God allowed Lucifer to persuade the angels in order that their faith in him might be tested. God wanted to know who would remain faithful. You see, salvation always comes through faith in God. And which angels God wanted to know would continue and to love him with all their heart, mind, and soul, even when there was no clear rebuttal to Lucifer's clever argument. The Father permitted the love and faith of his angels to be tested in the same way that he has allowed the love and faith of human beings to be tested. You see, love for and faith in God cannot be known until it's tested. Ask Peter. When Lucifer's rebellion reached critical mass, that is 1/3 of heaven, God stepped into the fray and cast Lucifer and his angels out of heaven, and at the same time, God put a stay of execution on Lucifer and his followers. God did not put them to death, as the law demanded at that time, so that the seeds of sin might fully mature, and everyone in the universe might have perfect knowledge about the properties of good and evil. You see, the stay of execution granted to Lucifer and his angels will end at the end of the 1,000 years. Then, the stay of execution will be lifted, and Lucifer and his angels will be executed as the law demands. Now, backing up just a minute, going back to the book sealed with 7 seals, let me pick up a couple of other points. When the Father wrote the book of life, this is the book sealed with 7 seals. I'll explain that later. The Father foreknew Lucifer's rebellion. He foreknew that Adam and Eve would fall, and he foresaw Jesus dying on the cross. It's all written in the history book before any history came to be. The Father foreknew all of these things before any life was created. Because God is eternally committed to principles of love, his primary concern was not Lucifer's upcoming rebellion or Adam and Eve's fall. The Father's primary concern was that of resolving the sin problem so that sin will not occur a 3rd time. In a universe where all created beings have the power of choice, The possibility for sin always exists. Always. Think about it. In a universe where all created beings are given by a God of love the power of choice, the possibility for sin always exists. We see that this is true. Sin happened in a sinless heaven. We see it happened on earth. Sin happened on a sinless earth because created beings have the power of choice. Because God gives His children the power of choice, He recognizes the possibility that sin can arise anywhere at any time. Therefore, to prevent a third rise of sin, God is resolving the current sin problem in such a way that if sin should occur 10 billion years from now, it will not hurt His children. You see, God's higher concern for His eternal universe explains why He that He put a stay of execution in place and allowed Lucifer to live and exercise freedom for a period of time. The Father has used Lucifer's rebellion to test the faith and loyalty of His angels. The Father has used Adam and Eve's rebellion to test the faith and loyalty of human beings. So God has used the curse of sin to achieve an excellent outcome. Here's how. God has not yet implemented the sudden death law because the problem with sin has not been resolved. Now listen carefully. But when the knowledge of good and evil has been fully made known, and the problem with sin fully understood, there will be no excuse for sin in God's universe. No justification whatsoever. Let's suppose 10 billion years from now that Jesus creates a whole new planet with people on it, like Adam and Eve. And suppose one of those happy, holy, sinless people is tempted to sin, that is, to rebel against God's law or God's order in some way. What will happen? First, God will send all of the ex-sinners from earth who were redeemed to visit that one person, and they will personally testify, look, we have been there, we've done that, and believe us, you do not want anything to do with sin because sin sucks. It brings sorrow, suffering, and death. Sin causes every sinner, sooner or later, to become a predator. So give up the temptation to rebel against God. But if that person, having the power of choice, should insist on sinning, here's the good news. He will die the day he sins, and the whole universe will rejoice that God acted swiftly, for God will not tolerate a third round with sin. Now carefully listen. Do you see how the sudden death law makes perfect sense in a universe having the knowledge of good and evil? Do you see why the sudden death law made no sense in a universe where the knowledge of good and evil was missing? Now you see why Lucifer's argument against God once made sense, but now it makes no sense. The sudden death law makes perfect sense. And you know now why faith in God has to be non-negotiable, because faith, when seen in reverse, always makes sense. One more point. God has perfect foreknowledge. Therefore, He does not create additional laws as time goes by. The great lawmaker established all laws necessary for eternity at the dawn of eternity, because He has perfect foreknowledge. All of God's laws have been in place before creation began. However, because He has infinite wisdom, God has temporarily suspended the sudden death law for the benefit of those who will live for eternity. By giving the nature, curse, and character of sin a chance to mature, the knowledge of good and evil will soon be complete. And because the knowledge of good and evil is coming to completion, there will be no excuse or tolerance for sin once the sin problem is resolved. Jesus is not going to redeem any more sinners after those are taken from earth. Think about this. God's thoughtful and intricate resolution to the sin problem with angels and human beings will eternally protect His children from sin's curse. Here's how. Because God's children have the power of choice, a sinner may appear at some distant point in eternity. But the good news is that he will also disappear that same day. Amen? You see, this is how God will eternally protect His children from sin's curse throughout eternity to come. If somebody should choose to sin at some point in the distant, eternal future, the good news is that that sinner will disappear the same day that he sinned because of the sudden death law, and everybody will say amen. There's no need for sin any longer. Okay, when Adam and Eve sinned, they were to be put to death on the day that they sinned. And what confuses scholars and theologians and pastors and laymen is that they didn't die that day. Well, there's a simple reason why. Jesus stepped in the way. And because of His daily intercession for Adam and Eve as individuals and their offspring, that is the human race, corporately speaking, a stay of execution was put in place. However, this stay of execution will end, and all of the wicked will be executed with the devil and his angels at the end of the 1,000 years. So you're probably wondering, why do I need to know about the sudden death law anyway? Actually, the sudden death law has a lot to do with the process that God is patiently going through to resolve the problem with sin. Now, keep the sudden death law in the back of your mind, because we're going to change subjects for just a minute. And later, we're going to tie these all together, or attempt to, okay? I want to introduce you to a new thought, perhaps. This is something that a lot of people do not know. But the Bible teaches that the book sealed with the 7 seals is actually the book of life. It's a history book of life. It contains the record of every life who has ever lived. That's why it's called the book of life. The book of life is not used in the judgment of human beings. Let me make that point very clear. It's the book sealed up with 7 seals. According to the Bible, the book of life is only opened once, and that occurs at the end of the 1,000 years. Look it up, Revelation 20, verse 12. This means that God's history book, the one that He wrote, the one that He sealed up with 7 seals, has nothing to do with the judgment of human beings. The words and actions of angels and human beings are recorded in real time by angels in books of record. Books of record. Now, books of record are books recorded in real time by angels with camcorders. During the judgment of mankind, the books of record are used, plural, books of record, not the book of life. More about this in a moment. Do you remember reading this passage in Revelation 5, verses 6 and 7? When Jesus had been found worthy, John says, "Then I saw a lamb looking as if it had been slain, standing in the center of the throne." Verse 7, "He came and took the scroll from the right hand of him who sat on the throne." The reason I'm asking if you remember that, you need to know that after the lamb that was slain receives the book sealed with 7 seals, it is identified in the book of Revelation as the Lamb's, you guessed it, book of life. Revelation 21, verse 27, "Nothing impure will ever enter the New Jerusalem, nor will anyone who does what is shameful or deceitful, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life." You see, the only book given to a lamb in Revelation's story is the book sealed with 7 seals. That's why it's called the Lamb's book of life. Look at this. Revelation 13:8, speaking of the great tribulation and the composite beast Babylon, "All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the book of life belonging to" whom? The Lamb that was slain from the creation of the world. The only book that belongs to the Lamb in Revelation's story is the one that he was found worthy to receive. That's how we know that the book sealed with 7 seals is the book of life. Now, Revelation 13:8 can be translated a little differently and with equal authority. It just depends on which manuscript we're looking at. Let's notice the second way Revelation 13:8 can be translated. "All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast. All whose names have not been written from the creation of the world in the book of life belonging to the Lamb that was slain." I hope you can see why the book sealed with 7 seals has to be the book of life. I want to take you to one more verse here in Revelation 17, verse 8. Speaking about the physical appearing of the devil, the angel told John, he said, "You know, John, the great red dragon that you saw, which you saw, once was visible, now is not visible. He was cast out of heaven and into the spirit realm, the abyss. And he will come up out of the abyss at the 5th trumpet and go to his destruction." So we're talking about the physical appearing of the devil, who once was visible. John saw him. Now is not visible because he's locked up in the spirit realm, but he's going to be allowed to come out of the abyss and go to his destruction. Now, here's the sentence I want you to pay close attention to. The inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world, will be astonished when they see the devil, because he once was visible, now is not, and yet will become plainly visible. The thing that I want you to notice here is that the angel doesn't say, "The wicked will be astonished when they see the beast." No. He says something far more significant than that. He says, look, the Father knew before the creation of the world who would worship the devil. The Father knew who would be rebellious. The Father knew who would be defiant. and their names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world. Now, here's the point. Think about this. If this information as to who would not be saved, if this information had been released long time ago, if the Father had let everybody see who was going to be saved and who was going to be lost, then he could never overcome the charge of determining himself who would be saved and who would be lost. Some people actually blame God with the concept called predestination, that God has determined who will be saved and who will be lost. Well, yes, God foreknew who would be and who would not be saved, but he sealed that perfectly up and kept it to himself because, as a God of love, the angels of record, the angels recording, using the books of record, have faithfully recorded every action. And when judgment is conducted on human beings that have died, the books of record are used, not the book of life which the Father wrote. No, Jesus will judge the dead based on what is written in the books of record that was recorded in real time. The book of life has nothing to do with the judgment of mankind. It will be shown at the end of the 1,000 years what the Father knew, but it will also be shown at the end of the 1,000 years that God's love for those who would be saved and those who he knew would be lost, that God's love and interest and endeavor and all that the affection that he could possibly show, that he was impartial. He loved the wicked just as much as he loved those who will be saved, because God is love. He sends the rain on the just and the unjust. Paul says, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Oh no, God loves everyone the same. He's no respecter of persons. And this is all going to come clear, very clear, at the appointed time, because God is resolving the sin problem once for all, so that sin will never again hurt his children. Well, we've run out of time for this segment. We will continue in just a moment.